Let's now talk about information assurance. Now, what is that? We're trying to provide assurance that our data, our information, and the systems will always maintain the CIA triad: confidentiality, integrity, availability, and authenticity at all times. We're trying to assure that. So IA is achieved by implementing a security architecture and a management program. That's the only way to be consistent. You don't just fix this, patch that. You've got to have an overarching program and a consistent, well thought out, tried and true method and framework to implement your security and to always discover new possibilities. So information assurance will include all of these things: access control and security for the network and infrastructure, applications, education, operations. It'll involve legal and regulatory requirements, disaster recovery, and encryption. It includes all of these things. So an information security framework, this is a series of processes that are documented. We define policy and procedure to implement and manage information security controls, and a control is anything that, from policy to something technical to something physical, to try to protect your system. We use it for security controls in an enterprise, big company environment, big network. The framework is a blueprint for building our program to manage risk and reduce vulnerabilities. There are some popular frameworks, and you shouldn't reinvent the wheel. You should pick a framework that works for your particular kind of business. So there's PCI DSS, there's ISO, there's Critical Security Control SIS, there's NIST, there's SABSA, COBIT, TOGAF. There's a bunch of them. And it's beyond the scope of this class to get deep into what they are. But you shouldn't just make something up. You should use something that's already been tested, tried, and true by others. Common criteria, which is something that has been around for quite some time, this is an international set of standardized guidelines and specs. It establishes a baseline level of confidence in a product, in the security functionality of an IT product. And it will assign something called an EAL, an evaluation assurance level, to that particular product. It ensures that the certified product meets an agreed upon standard for government deployments. So here are just some examples. You don't need to memorize these. If you were taking the CISSP, you would need to know all this. But to be aware, there are EAL levels 1 through 7, with 1 just, we tested the functionality, up to 3 and 4. This is medium level of assurance. We've methodically tested. And then we get up to the semi-formal and formal designs and reviews and tests. So this is common criteria. As you create your architecture, what you'll do is you'll adopt whatever relevant framework works for you. Your architecture should include the business context. What is your information used for? Why is it important? What is the big picture, the conceptual layer? What is our enterprise profile and risk? What are our risk attributes? The logical layer. What are the logical paths that information or services or processes or applications go through? How are we going to implement it? And what solutions will we actually use? What solutions or devices or software, processes, other components will we use to maintain that security and mitigate the vulnerabilities? There's the Information Security Management Program. This is the implementation of an EISA into a program. And the whole purpose of this is to make sure that our business operates in a state of reduced risk. It will cover all of our organizational, operational processes and participants relevant to our security. Now, IA focuses on risk assessment and mitigation. Info security focuses on actually implementing security measures to safeguard the systems. If you're going to measure your success, you need some kind of yardstick, and that's what a metric is. Security metrics are some way of measuring something over time. You use the metrics to show how successful you are. So you can say, well, we had X number of incidents last year, and now we're down to half that. You use metrics to show trends. Are you doing better? Are you doing worse? Are you doing the same? What areas need to be improved? Like, you could look at the number of unpatched and known vulnerabilities. That would be a common metric right there. As the number goes down, your network would be considered to have improved. So you want to show these trends. Just a single snapshot report alone will not be enough. You're going to have measurable results. That's the whole purpose of metrics. So just a few examples. Number of security incidents per month. The incident response time, did it decrease? The incident mitigation and repair time. The number of systems that have been patched. Number of antivirus updates per month. Policies, procedures, and guidelines. This is something that an ethical hacker might not think of right off the bat, but you need to understand that good information security has these in place. Somebody else went to the trouble to figure out what's the best practice. A policy is a high-level statement. It will not say specifically, we're going to use a particular product or a particular technology, but it will say what we're trying to accomplish in terms of protecting our systems and our information. What are the business rules to safeguard the CIA triad? And we'll apply policies to users, systems, partners, networks, providers. You can have different policies, like one for remote access, one for mobile devices, one for using the network, one for how you authenticate, one for encryption. You can have a whole bunch of policies. Really small organizations might have like one policy with several sections. Big organizations might have a whole collection of policies, like 100 different kinds, each for something very specific. Procedures are the actual detailed steps to accomplish a goal, to actually implement a policy. And procedures will change regularly. These are the instructions somebody can follow to meet a policy requirement. So, standard operating procedure. And it will update constantly as technology and processes improve. Guidelines are recommendations. They're not mandatory. Policies are considered mandatory, but guidelines are recommendations. What would you do? Here's some advice. For information security policies, we're trying to ensure that all users and networks within our organization meet a minimum level of protection. And you can have different departments and different types of devices that have different policies because they have different levels of requirements. It will outline the expectations for employees, and it will also outline penalties for breaking policy. The goal of an IS policy, we want to maintain management and administration of network security. We want to protect our compute resources. We don't want to get in legal trouble. We want to prevent waste of compute resources. We want to prevent unauthorized modification of the data. Define what rights users have in terms of access. Protect confidential proprietary information from theft or misuse or unauthorized disclosure. Now, in terms of security policies, there are sort of different approaches. You could have a policy that has pretty much no restrictions, that says, we're a small company, or we're a training environment, or we're just a development environment, no restrictions. We call that a promiscuous policy. Or you can have a permissive policy. Well, like a small business would probably be permissive. A few restrictions, but only on some known attacks, like maintain your antivirus, make sure that you have a password. And then you can have a prudent policy, the maximum security. Block everything unless we know we're using it. We would use this typically in an unclassified government facility. And then you can be paranoid. You can restrict everything, little or no internet connectivity, classified government facility would use the paranoid policy. For implementing your IS policy, the best practice is to implement the strictest policy that is practical for your environment. Your environment might not need much, or it might really need protection. You need to harden, in other words, lock down, patch, remove the risks, your network, your devices, services, apps at all levels. Implement security at multiple layers. And don't think that just one thing like a strong perimeter or good physical security alone will protect everything. You got to have good security at all layers. You should have 2 printed copies of the policy. You should give it to your every employee, as soon as they join. And they should be asked to sign and return 1 copy. This should be filed by the company so that you can go back and say, you signed this, you knew. But I'm going to tell you something very practical. If you don't train people, they can sign whatever and not have a clue what they're signing or why. You need to train them to understand why it's important, what to do, how to recognize the risks, and why they should or shouldn't do something. Give them the WIFM, the what's in it for me. Make sure that they understand that they're a stakeholder here. No one should be allowed to use the company's computer system until they've signed the policy and accepted its terms. Here are some common policies. User account policy, password policy, acceptable use. Yeah, you can't be using a computer to surf porn or to sell your own stuff. Wireless security policy for staff, guests, vendors, partners. Data retention policy. Now, you really got to talk to your legal department for this, because they'll tell you for your particular industry how long you're required to retain data and how to safeguard data that you store. Access control. What are we protecting, and what are the rules that govern how people get to those things we're protecting? Remote access. Who can VPN into something or dial, as the old days? When and how would remote access be permitted? And managing the firewall. How are we going to manage the firewall? How are we going to monitor events on the firewall and maintain the logs and look at the logs? These are just some of the common ones. This isn't even the end of the list. Network connection policy. When and how are you going to connect? Information protection policy. Let's label all of our information based on its sensitivity. Who can have access? How's it stored? How's it transmitted? How should it be deleted? Special access policy. Who needs administrative rights or needs access to something highly restricted? Email policy. How are we going to use corporate email? Realize also, in most countries, you are required to have privacy policies as well. So one thing you got to make sure that employees understand is if they're using company equipment, they should not have any expectation of privacy except as required by law. So in other words, if you're using the company email, people can read it, If you're storing stuff on a company computer, someone else can look at that. For workplace privacy, you need to limit the amount of collected information. Talk to your legal department about that. Tell employees that information is being collected. Keep them informed of why you're collecting it, when, how, what you might use it for. Maintain accurate employee records. Let employees access their own information and secure it for them. And monitor their email or internet activities. You need to let them know that they're being monitored. Because if you don't tell them, legally this could be an invasion of privacy. Again, work with your legal team to know what is correct for your jurisdiction. So how do we create and implement a security policy? First thing is we'll perform a risk assessment and get to that in a bit. We'll use proper types of organizational standards. What's right for our particular kind of organization? You need to involve senior management because they've got to sign off on it. You set penalties for violations. You create the finalized version, make sure everyone understands it, signs and agrees upon it, and you've got to train them. And you need to enforce the policy evenly and enforce it at all levels, including with top-level management and contractors. That top management is a tough one sometimes. Train people sufficiently and in accordance with their particular job. And you're going to have to review and update regularly. How often? It's beyond the scope of what an ethical hacker has to care about, but usually security policies should at least be reviewed every year. Now, there are HR implications, legal implications of enforcing security policies. Human resources, your HR department is the one that will be responsible for making employees aware of the policies. They're going to be responsible for doing the security training and make sure that everybody has security training. They'll work with management to monitor policy implementation and violation. The legal team, policies need to be developed in consultation with your legal team, and you're going to have to put additional attention on potentially violating employee rights. So keep that in mind as well. What are the risks of having security policies? No one pays attention. No one takes them seriously. They're not enforced, or they're not enforced evenly. People won't adopt it, or upper management isn't supporting it. That's the biggest risk. You really have to have upper management saying, folks, this is what we're doing. Keep in mind that security culture always starts with the top. Corporate culture is driven really by what upper management does or thinks. Everyone from the CEO all the way down to the new hires have got to comply with security policies. And I know how difficult it is. You get somebody who's a C-level officer, they want exemptions. They don't want to be bothered. They're the ones you have to protect the most because they have access to the most sensitive stuff. The problem is if executive management doesn't comply and you don't enforce the consequences of non-compliance, then you're going to have mistrust up and down the organization. You're going to have apathy by everybody towards your policy. So this is our look at information assurance and all the things that go with it. We'll look a little bit more at some of the side topics to this just a little down the road. So now, on to the next topic.